Hey everyone, this is the ThinkEnergy podcast, and I'm your host, Dan Seguin from Hydro Ottawa. Are you looking to better understand the fast-changing world of energy? Well, the ThinkEnergy podcast isn't your ordinary energy show. Every 2 weeks, we take you on a tour and discuss, through a communication lens, some of the coolest trends, emerging technologies, and latest innovations. So stay tuned as we explore some traditional and some quirky facets of this industry. This is the ThinkEnergy podcast. Welcome to a very special episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. Today's podcast is dedicated to all utility workers that assist with emergency response efforts during times of crises. On September 21st, 2018, Ottawa residents witnessed a devastating storm that resulted in several tornadoes, heavy winds, and lightning that caused more than 250 power outages across the Ottawa region. 174,000 customers were without power at the height of the storm. For the local utility, Hydro Ottawa, that equated to half of its customers in the National Capital Area. Personally, I can tell you that I've never seen destruction to homes, businesses, and neighborhoods like this before in Ottawa. It was truly devastating. Throughout this 4-day event, Hydro Ottawa teams came together to assess damage, restore power, and communicate. So here's today's big question. During a major crisis, when restoration times are nearly impossible to estimate, what does it take for a utility to maintain positive public sentiment, credibility, and trust? My 3 special guests today include a power line maintainer, a control room operator, and a social media communicator, all of whom worked during the tornado event of 2018. Hi Jack, thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. Can you tell our listeners what it is that you do at Hydro Ottawa?
So I'm a power line maintainer. So we work on the pole lines.
Talk to me about where you were when you actually got that call on September 21st.
I was in Bell's Corners. With the storm approaching, they'd asked some of us to stay late, anticipating some trouble. The wind had blown a tree over, taking some wire down from a backyard pole line, leaving local houses out of power. Just after we finished getting the wire in the air and the power back on, another bout of rain came down. We didn't find out about the tornado until after we were finished up in the area. Looking back, we were actually quite close to the one that hit in Arlington Woods.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Oh, God, okay. What were some of your first reactions when you saw the devastation? So I'm assuming that you actually, like you were just talking about the Friday night, but I'm assuming you were there, you were on the Saturday and the Sunday, and you probably saw exactly what the damage looked like. So what were your first reactions?
Yeah, the first one I saw was west of the city. At first I was awestruck. We rolled up on 5th Line Road just outside of Dunrobin. Mm-hmm. It's a heavily treed area, and the trees are right tight to the road on either side. So driving down the road, it looked as it normally would, until we came upon the path of the tornado. It was nearly 1 kilometer wide, perpendicular to the road. Every tree in its path was flattened.
Oh,
it was unbelievable.
Okay. The
sheer power of it was astounding. It was like nothing was there, right?
Okay.
Bulldozer went through. We then drove to the village of Dunrobin. That was surreal.
Okay.
It seemed like, it almost looked like a video of some place in Oklahoma that you might see on the news after tornado.
Yeah, and Tornado Alley.
Exactly. It seemed so out of place. You couldn't help but imagine your own house and your family at home, and hope all these families made it through okay. It's a blessing that no one was harmed. The tornado that hit Arlington Woods touched down right on one of the terminal stations and transmission lines from Hydro One that supplies power to the city. As it continued, it wiped out our sub-transmission lines that supply more of our stations in other communities as well as power lines feeding local customers in that area. So while Hydro One crews were working around the clock trying to rebuild their lines and station to supply us power again, we were also working 12-hour shifts day and night, setting poles to rebuild all the lines that it had taken down. Our underground crews were also replacing pad mount transformers. They're the green boxes outside of people's houses that they'd see. and also repairing underground infrastructure that had got pulled and tugged on and ripped out.
So you were busy.
Very.
Very busy. It took 4 days to actually restore the power to all our customers. What made the restoration efforts so complex?
Well, it was much more labor intensive than it was complex. In fact, we were very fortunate because it could have been more complex. As I mentioned, it hit one of our supplies to the city. When that happened, it knocked the power out to all the infrastructure that it proceeded to damage. Because of that, we were able to reuse nearly all the wire and some of the material from the poles that were broken. If the tornado would have hit those poles first, when they were live, there would have been lines coming down causing electrical flashes and fires and such, right? So the damage would have been much, much more intense, and that we would have had to restring new conductor and not be able to reuse a lot of the old conductor material, which would have made the outage much longer and a lot more complex to actually tidy up. We were very lucky that it was a simple yet a very large feat to get it back.
Did you have to contend with a lot of downed trees or like vegetation? It must have been like you must have had trees all over the place, so you've got to clean that up before. There
was a lot of them in Arlington Woods. It was a right-of-way and a park, so luckily there wasn't too many there. There still was enough, but in Dunrobin, it's a very heavily treed area, and it was immense, the amount of trees down there. Was actually an Amish restoration company that had come into site with us and were helping clear the trees ahead of us so that we could get lines back up in the air. So they had a lot of help in restoring it for us.
Okay, so this is my last question here. What was your experience with the public and how they responded to seeing you and your crews? Like, I mean, I'm sure when they see the guys in orange after a tornado rips through, you guys are heroes. So how does that make you feel? And just talk to me about that a bit.
Yeah, the public was wonderful. We had numerous people stopping by, bringing us coffee, baked goods, you name it. I don't know anybody that had an experience with an upset member of the public at all.
Okay, so the community did come strong together, and you guys were just there to deliver.
Absolutely, they were fabulous, and we met a lot of good people. I'd also like to take this opportunity to send my sympathies to all the families affected by the tornado. I couldn't imagine what you've been through and what you continue to be through, so I'm sorry for your losses.
Jack, thank you very much for taking the time today to share your experience with us. I'm sure our listeners truly appreciate getting these different views through different lenses today. So again, thank you for sharing your stories, and good luck on everything that you do.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Cheers. Welcome, Lana. Can you tell our listeners what it is exactly that you do?
Sure. So I'm a field technician with Hydro Ottawa. In my role as a field technician, I advise and provide the technical input to our key stakeholders in distribution design and in operations. I manage the large-scale projects that are high impact and so that they are financially accurate, scheduled, and ready for execution by our field crews.
Very interesting. Let me ask you this question. Where were you when the tornado actually hit?
So I was in the city's west end, just south of the river. And as we later found out, I was at the midpoint between Dunrobin and where the tornadoes touched down in Arlington Woods. So every year, Hydro Ottawa hosts a charity golf tournament in support of the Ottawa Hospital, and I was there in support.
So how was the trek to work when you were called in?
Well, we saw the storm coming through all day. Okay. And so as it was getting closer and the day was coming to a close at the charity golf tournament, we got hit with some pretty hard rain, and the golf course itself had a few tornadoes or a few trees come down.
Oh, really? Okay.
So we were receiving outage alerts, and then we knew that our service territory was going to need us.
Okay, cool. What is the hardest thing about your job during an actual crisis? A major one, if you want.
So the hardest thing about my job during the crisis has to be knowing that no matter how quickly you want to restore the power, it'll never be quick enough. So in Ottawa, our customers enjoy power 99.3% of the time, and that's based on a 2017 stat. And then during a crisis, the power is simply not there. So you take everything you learn during a crisis and apply it to your job every day. On our best days, I plan for our worst days so that our worst days get better. And how that breaks down is providing the technical recommendations on infrastructure. Let's choose switch type A instead of switch type B because it makes the most sense in this application.
Can you share with our listeners during the actual event, what was your job? Because I saw you in the room and there were a bunch of people around a table. What is it that you had to do? Maybe elaborate on it just a bit.
Sure. So when we went into storm management mode, we had operations break out into our 4 key areas. So we had a crew in the west, a crew in the south, a crew in central, and a crew in the east. And so I was part of the team in the south looking after the Nepean area that was hardest hit.
Okay.
And so as the calls came in through the customers, they were sent directly to our team at the South Core, and from there we dispatched to triage the situation.
So is it safe to assume there's an assessment process before you begin restoration? For an event like that, for a big event, you don't just send the trucks to fix things. You need to assess the damage before?
Absolutely. It's much similar to if you went to the hospital, right? Like you're first, like the calls come in and you assess where you're
So it's the actual triage.
It's the triage of it. It's, connecting the dots. It's having, a customer at one address call in and report that the line's down, and then maybe a customer a few houses away is reporting the same thing. And so then you try and piece all the parts together to get a clearer picture. You're really using everybody's data that they're calling in with to put together the clear picture for the crews and help make the assessment on where to start the restoration first.
Is there a particular moment or memory that stands out for you?
So in my 8 years at Hydro Ottawa, every storm that Ottawa's experienced, I've always experienced from the field. And the tornadoes were different for me. I didn't leave the office.
Okay.
So in the moment that stands out for me occurred somewhere between day 2 and day 3 of the restoration. And there was this moment when everyone on the inside came together and enjoyed one another's company for a few minutes in a hallway in a buffet lineup. Yes, my favorite moment was when dinner showed up, but it was everything that went into that moment and then all the time thereafter that made it memorable. So I had every confidence that our field crews would continue to do what they do best, restore the power, and look out for one another.
Did you miss the fact that you weren't in the field and you were, I'll say, within 4 walls?
I did. It was very different for me. So typically I'm used to, if there's a line down, I know where it is in my head. I can map out the line. Typically, all those things come very natural. And so for this time, I was very much on the inside and then having to use my resources on the outside for feedback. And then in turn, where people were less experienced in the field, guiding them through to look for the next cue to solve the problem and get the power back on.
Okay. Last question here. Resembles the one we just asked before. But what was the most challenging moment you experienced during the actual event, and were there any lessons learned?
So lessons learned. Enjoy what you do and learn as much about the trade and about the business as you can and how things work. You never know when you'll be called upon in a crisis situation to make those key decisions.
Okay, very good. Well, Lana, thank you very much for coming in today and sharing this with us. I'm sure there's a lot of people that do want to look at it through that lens. As we were going through the 4-day event, it was actually longer for us, but through that whole event, a lot of people didn't get the insider view. So I truly appreciate the fact that you're giving us that view for our listeners. So again, much grateful, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Jacqueline, thank you for doing this today. I truly appreciate you taking the time off to share with our listeners how you went through this major event, the tornado.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan.
Okay, Jacqueline, can you tell our listeners what it is that you do?
Sure. So my actual job title is Content and Communications Planning Officer. It's kind of a big mouthful that basically means I live and breathe social media. It's my job basically to plan the content and posts for Hydro Ottawa's social media accounts, so Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and also to monitor these accounts every day. So answering our customers' questions, giving updates and safety information during power outages, sharing community events, and just keeping a general tabs on what's going on in our city. So our customers will often reach out to us on social media with any number of questions. Hey, this tree looks a little bit too close to those power lines. Do you want to come check it out? Or I got an email from you guys. I just want to check if it's legitimate. You never know what you're going to get on social media. So it's my job to work closely with people all across the organization, HR, operations, customer service, even control room and management, just to make sure I have the accurate information to answer our customers when they have their questions. And basically, hopefully, plan content based on their questions and try and answer their questions before they even have them.
Very cool. Interesting job.
It's a lot of fun, I'm not going to lie.
Cool. What is the role of a social media communicator during a crisis?
So I think in any crisis, social media is a big driver, especially Twitter. It moves fast. There's a lot of information. Not all of it is correct information. So as a social media communicator, it's my job to share accurate information and timely updates whenever we can, keep the public updated and informed, keep them safe. And also to have a two-way conversation with our customers. So I'm talking with them, I'm hearing their stories, reading their stories, I guess, and really just getting a sense of what they're going through in the given situation. I think that's where the importance of the human side of your brand and organization really needs to come out. As humans, when something bad happens or something tragic happens, we react. We have emotional triggers, emotional responses, and it's really important for a brand to reflect that as well. Show that we're human too, and hey, we're living this crisis right along with you. The last thing I'll just say in a crisis about social media is it's really a good resource for the brand themselves. So it's my job. In the industry, we call this social media listening. So it's my job to keep tabs on what everyone is saying in the city or in the geographical area that's affected, capture exactly how they're reacting, what's going on, and relay that information back to the organization and to the company so that the company has a sense of how the public is reacting to the situation as well.
So that social listening is very important because it probably helps you with that social license to operate. So by listening, you're actually aware of what some of the issues are or potential issues, and you can act or react.
Exactly. And I mean, social listening is important during, business as usual times, not just in a crisis, but it's even more critical in times of crisis. I'll take the tornado, for example, when we had people sharing pictures or videos, we could see exactly where the damage was, exactly what streets were affected, what exact house was affected. And it helps our crews also to pinpoint the problems, get the ball rolling, and get the crews out there as quickly as they can.
Are you able to outline for the listeners here your exact role on the crisis communication team during a major event? What are you tasked to do?
Sure. So absolutely. I would say that the role has sort of three prongs to it. The first one, obviously, is the customer-facing information, sharing those updates, getting that information out. One thing that was really important was making sure that we had something to say, even if we didn't actually have something to say, whether we were still assessing the grid or, it had been 3 hours. Not much had really changed, but we still have to say something so that the public knows, hey, we're here, we're working, we're on it, and we're with you.
So it's that constant dialogue.
It's exactly, and that's what it is. That's what it all boils down to. And they don't really need you to say, hey, the power's going to come back at exactly this time. They just need you to say, hey, we're still here. And we still know that you're still without power, and we're not going to stop working until it's back on. So even if it's just sharing information about what to do if streetlights are out or power lines are down, how to safely use your generator, how long till your food in your fridge goes bad, all of that information was super critical to our customers and to just the city in general. And then I'm also having this two-way conversation with them. So again, hearing their stories, seeing what's going on. I would say on that Friday night at the peak of it, when the phone lines were so jammed, no one could get through, the outage map was having troubles. It really felt that Twitter and Facebook were kind of the one place that customers were really going to, that they knew that they could get an answer quickly and get information.
Not just our customers, because I would assume media, like if you look at a lot of these influencers are looking for some type of gateway to that information, and you're basically saying like you're leveraging that opportunity to share all of the information, whether video or photos.
Absolutely. And it's not just, I mean, we had media, we had, members of parliament, local government, we had, hockey players from the Ottawa Senators even tweeting us with their questions. At one point, I think we were getting about 60 notifications a minute on Twitter.
Okay.
And on Twitter.
So you were busy.
I was pretty busy. It was a busy Friday night. I'm not going to forget that night anytime soon. And again, to that point you were making about getting those influencers or those influential people or stakeholders that are reaching out. Another part of my job is also directing those people to the appropriate. We do have media officers. We do have government relations or other people that are not necessarily me that need to be answering those questions and directing those to the right people. And as well, just keeping the rest of the crisis team updated on what's going on online and what's going on in the public and out there in the city is a big part of that job as well.
Cool. What type of posts actually worked best during the event? Was it photos? Was it videos? What actually got the most engagement?
So I would say video was huge. Video was outstanding for us. We had we have a great videographer, Jake. He's fantastic. I think you guys have heard him on this podcast before.
If you haven't, actually, guys, just check out the podcast on drones.
Yeah, so Jake's a great drone operator. We had some really great footage, both from the ground and aerial, thanks to the drone footage, that really showed the scope of the damage, the extent of the damage, and seeing it in video form. I mean, you can see a picture and it looks really bad, but seeing it in video form and zooming in on different things, you really get a sense of people's homes were destroyed, forests, people's vehicles. It was just kind of chaos out there. And I don't think that people really understood the extent of the damage of that tornado until they saw those videos, especially the folks living in sort of the East End, the Orleans area, who weren't necessarily as impacted, or maybe people who were impacted by a loss of power from the grid, but no damage was near their house, so they didn't necessarily understand. I would say video was absolutely huge. Our videos were shared hundreds of thousands of times, picked up by all kinds of media. And because of those, we actually got a huge growth in our social media audience. Okay. Our Twitter actually went up by about 14,000 people in the span of 3 days, which just added to the workload, which is absolutely great. And they were able to really see and understand what was going on in their city.
Out of an event like that, like you just basically said, like you've seen channel growth. Have you been able to maintain that number of followers?
We actually did. I was pretty surprised. We got about, I would say on Twitter, about a 75% growth in our audience over that weekend, and the following days until everyone was back online. And to be honest, from industry expertise in social media, I wasn't necessarily expecting them all to stick around. I figured, hey, the event's over. Everyone's got their power back. We're going to lose some. Didn't happen.
Well, that says a lot. That actually says a lot about us being relevant and good content and timing.
And the value of social media to our business as well, because I find that we can really help, show how valuable social media is by saying this many people really do come to us through this exact channel, and they know that that's where they can get their information, and they trust that it's going to be there. It's just, I was completely surprised at how we actually maintained those followers, and to this day we're even beyond that number that we were then.
Very cool. So in other words, if you want channel growth, you need an outage. I know we don't wish that on anybody. But
no, we don't. We don't want those, but they do work.
Okay, so let's move on to our last question here. What was the most challenging moment you experienced during this event?
So that's a funny question. I don't know if everyone knows this, but I actually only started to work at Hydro Ottawa 2 weeks before the tornadoes hit. So To say that was a challenge might be an understatement, but I was still getting to know our brand, our social media voice, the policies at Hydro Ottawa. I was still getting to know the people and who was responsible for what. I'd never been to any of our offices after hours, for example. So even getting to the office and getting, situated back at my desk, logistically was a bit of a challenge. I've had a lot of crisis training in social and planning in previous jobs and in previous aspects of my career. So the actual tweeting part of it was not the challenge for me. It was really logistically being new and being not necessarily having all the information. And again, the traffic, the city was gridlocked. You couldn't get anywhere. I even remember you called me on the phone saying, don't even bother trying to come this way. The street's closed. You can't get there. So I ended up going completely different ways. Streetlights were out everywhere.
Yeah,
it was
you ended
gridlock.
up at the other office.
I ended up at the other office from everyone else, which was interesting because I was, alone in it. Well, I wasn't alone. There was a couple other people there with me, but in an office that I wasn't familiar with after hours, away from the rest of the team. So there was some logistical challenges. But what I found really helped was, again, just the human side of things. You can be in any situation, and as long as you're just cognizant and you're aware of the human element and what's going on, you can get through it. And I think that whether it was me in the office with my coworkers or whether it was our customers and the residents of the city of Ottawa bonding together, banding together, supporting each other, something I'm not sure I've seen from our city in a really long time, and something I'm certainly not going to forget.
Cool. Well, listen, thank you very much for sharing this with us today. Dear listeners, this was Jacqueline actually working as a social media officer at Hydro Ottawa. Again, thank you for coming down and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of ThinkEnergy. If so, please head on over to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe.